This is some short sentences about.
This is about
one writer each, because we are kind of running.
Yeah.
Running out of time.
This is about the difference about.
Who would like to start?
No, I just thought we were going to talk about one writer each, author.
Yeah, I think so.
And who wants to start?
Yeah, you.
Yeah.
Okay. I chose to talk about Daniel Defoe, and he was active during the Enlightenment, and he wrote one of his most famous novels is Robinson Crusoe.
Yeah.
Is that how you say it? Okay.
Yeah, Crusoe.
And he wrote very realistic novels because he had a background as a journalist, and he was it's kind of hard to explain, but he was not very critical, and he also describes everything very
detailed.
but yeah, kind of detailed, but also how it is in the real world. He doesn't make stuff up.
Yeah.
I don't know, really, just realistic.
Realistic, yeah.
Yes. For example, the protagonist personifies, maybe, the real or the ideal human being, and I think that's kind of an indication that he's realistic and he's scientific and not very imaginative, if that's the right word to describe it.
Exactly, he's not that imaginative because this was in the Enlightenment era, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of short about Robinson Crusoe.
Yeah.
The book. Yeah. Okay.
Wow.
Okay, so I chose William Wordsworth, and he's said to be lonely as a cloud, because he's a lover of nature, and that is well explained in his poetry, where he often personifies the landscape and people from where he grew up, which were the Lake District in Cumbria. And yeah, he was very understandable and simplistic in his language, and often wrote his poetry using his hometown as a setting, but he was also very reflecting about life and society, and yeah. And it says here, his poetry was impossible to live without, as in lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey, where he grew up. And yeah. Yep, that's it.
Okay. I chose Afro Ben, and that's because I think she was influencer during the Enlightenment, because she was the first woman in Britain to support herself by writing, and therefore I find her as a very inspiring person. And she also wrote a play called Orongo, and that criticized slavery and racism, and for that reason I think she was a very interesting and important and strong woman, and that her works are still important today. And that was basically it.
Yeah. Should I go now?
Yeah.
I chose Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. He's German. He lived during the Enlightenment, but he was part of the it's called the Sturm und Drang movement, I think, and basically it was an early Romanticism era during the Enlightenment. So they were like 50 years earlier than everybody else. And William Wordsworth, he was very much into nature, and I personally would also say that he was probably very lonely. His most renowned work would be The Sorrows of Young Werther, where it's basically about him. He writes about this girl. It's a letter. What's it called? Book.
The
Novel.
No.
And basically it's letters just going back and forth, mostly from this guy called Werther to this girl, where he just explains how he hates his life, how he feels lonely and everything. But it's basically a mirroring of Johann von Goethe's own life. But the book was released, and it was released for 6 weeks during 1757, I think, or something like that. 82, and it sparked this new era, which was called something like Werther sickness. Like, everybody would read it, and in his hometown, he moved to a bigger town, and when he came home, there were people flocking outside of his. I don't know if you say flocking, but there were people he couldn't pass through to his gate because there were so many people there out of admiration because they loved the book, and I think he sparked revolutionary kind of romanticism earlier than romanticism even started existing. So that's something I really liked about him. I thought about him actually when Dead Poets say when they start standing up on the tables in the end, and they're really revolutionary throughout the entire movie. And I really thought about that because they were in the Enlightenment. If we talk scientifically, their school was very scientific, and then they start stepping up on their tables, and they start breaking the rules, and they start speaking from their hearts and wanting to act out of their hearts. And so I thought about that. Anna?
Very beautiful. The last author to be presented here is Edgar Allan Poe. So during the Romantic era, there were two streams, the poetic and the Gothic stream, and Edgar Allan Poe is considered to be one of the most influential figures of the Romantic era, specifically the Gothic stream, as I mentioned. He is best known for his short stories and poetry, and one of them are The Raven. What the Gothic stream really implies is that there were explorations of the human mind, and in a horror theme, kind of horror kind of theme, where you would explore the madness of the human mind, what is good, what is evil, etc. And Edgar Allan Poe himself did not live a very fortunate life. He was an orphan. His wife died prior to his success from The Raven, about 2 years after that, and he died due to unknown reasons. And he died very young too, at the age of 40. So that was Edgar Allan Poe.
Okej. Oj. Åh nej. Stopp.